Hey guys, we are the Null Operators, and this is video number 3 in our web series on how to learn to code in Java. And today we're going to be covering loops. So, what are loops? If we open up our notepad here, before we talked about how the program structure would start at the top and move in a linear fashion. And if I wanted to have any kind of branch in the program, I would use a selection structure. Well, there's also something else we can do. We can create loops. So I can basically repeat a task over and over until some condition is met. So this here would be a loop. And there's 3 different kinds of loops, and we're going to get into that in the code. So we have 3 different types of loops. We have the for loop, the while loop, and the do while loop. I'm just going to write these as comments, and we'll get into them here. So what's the difference between these loops? Well, I want to use a for loop whenever I know the exact number of iterations that I'm going to be running. And iterations are just the repetitions of the loop, right? So when I know how many times I want it to run is when I'll use this. So use this when. The while loop is whenever we don't know how many times we want something to run. And in this circumstance, we're going to have some condition that will just continue to repeat until it gets to the exit condition for the loop. And we don't know when that's going to be. For example, if I'm validating user input, right? If I want to get a value from the user, but I want to make sure it's a positive number, I don't know how many times they're going to screw up and give me the wrong number. So in that case, I would use a while loop. Whereas if I wanted to add up all the numbers from 1 to 10, I could do that in a for loop because I know that's going to be 10 numbers. And the do while loop is very similar to the while loop. The only difference between this is that this is guaranteed to run at least one time, whereas the while loop is not guaranteed to do so. And that's going to make more sense once we actually code this out. So let's code out this for loop then. You're going to start off with for, and then open and close parentheses and some curly braces. And there are 3 things inside of this for loop. There is your initialization, then there is your end condition, and your increment. So what I mean by initialization is we're either going to use an existing variable or create one. In my case, I'll create one, and I'll say int I equals 0. So I create a variable called I set it to 0. And for my second condition, this is going to run as long as I is less than 10, is what that's saying. And every time this runs, I is going to go up by 1. And I don't think you've seen this yet. The plus plus, that basically just means add 1 to this variable. And we'll get into that more later. So what's going to happen here? I have this variable I that starts at 0, and it goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And that's the last number that's less than 10. Whenever it hits 10, that's the point which we exit the loop, because this is the thing that determines when we exit. So if I is ever equal to or greater than 10, we'll exit the loop. So what can I do in a for loop? If we take the example that we talked about earlier, where I wanted to add up all the numbers between 1 and 10, I can create a variable here. I'll call it sum, and I'm going to start it off at 0. And the reason I'm going to start it off at 0 is because I'm going to be adding to this sum. So the sum has to have a starting point. I can't add a number to another one if the other one doesn't exist. So I have to give it a value of 0. And now I can add the value of I to this every time the loop runs. And that's how this is going to look. So plus equals is going to be the same thing as sum equals sum plus I. It's just shorthand. So we saw this before where we said the new value for sum is equal to the old value plus something else, right? Well, we can shorthand that to just say sum plus equals I. So now, if we print this out, we'll get our answer. So we'll see that adding up the numbers 0 through 9 will give us a grand total of 45. So that's why this is really powerful, because it would be pretty tedious if I wanted to say, sum equals 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 plus 5 plus 6 plus 7 plus 8 plus 9, right? That would be pretty annoying. And this is actually a simple example, right? Usually you're going to use loops that run a lot more iterations than this. So if I want something to run 100 times or 1,000 times or 1,000,000 times, I definitely don't want to be writing out each one of those calculations. I can use a loop to do that for me. So let's take a look at the while loop then. So the way a while loop starts off is the word while, not in capital. We open up some parentheses and some curly braces. And this while loop is kind of like the if statement, where there's a Boolean expression in here. So if I create two integers, I say int a equals 0 and int b equals 10, or I don't even need b, we'll just get rid of that. I can say while a is less than 10, continue running this. And what are we going to do? We'll do the same thing. We'll create a sum. So we'll just use the one that already exists and reset it to 0. And I'll say sum plus equals a. And then I'll print it out at the end. Now here, there is a trap. In our for loop, we had this increment happen here, right? So every time the loop ran, I went up by 1. Here in this while loop, this a is never changing. I'm saying while a is less than 10, sum plus equals a, but a never goes up. A never gets closer to 10. So this is what's called an infinite loop. This will never stop running, and it'll crash your program eventually because you run out of memory. So you want to make sure with a while loop you include your increment inside of the body of the loop. So the body is the thing between the curly braces. So you want to include your increment there, and it can be by 1, or I can increment it by 2. It doesn't really matter. Just the point is whatever increment you have needs to be inside the body of the loop. And I'll even change these values. Let's say I'm adding up the numbers from 2 to 7, just so it's different from the for loop. And so if we run this to check it out, we'll have our for loop sum is 45. So the numbers from 1 to 9 added up are 45. And the numbers from 2 to 6 added up is going to be 20. Now, let's talk about, before we go on to the while loop, what if we made this an invalid condition? Well, what if I say while a is less than 1? 2 is never less than 1. So what's going to happen is this loop is going to be ignored completely, and my sum is going to be 0. And we can see that right here. And with the for loop, similarly, something can happen. If I start my I off at 15, 15 is never less than 10. So if I run this, the sum there will also be 0. So both of these loops are not guaranteed to run. They have to meet the condition that we specified in order for them to have any iterations. The do while loop is different. The do while loop is guaranteed to run at least one time. So if I create int b equals, we'll do 5. We'll reset our sum. And the do while loop is going to look like this. I'm going to type out do and then no parentheses. I'm going to open up my curly braces. And then at the end of the curly braces, I'm going to put my while condition. And so this is going to be just like the other while condition. It's going to be kind of like what you did in the if statement. It's just a Boolean expression. So it could be anything here. I'm just going to say while b is greater than 0. Say sum plus equals b. And then we need to remember, just like the while loop, to include our increment. And in this case, I'm going to decrement. I'm going to go down instead of up. So I have while b is greater than 0, while 5 is greater than 0, get closer to 0, basically. So I'll say b minus minus. And this is the same thing as plus plus. It just sends me in the opposite direction. So I subtract 1 from b every time the loop runs. And let's see what our answer is. So we get 15. 5 plus 4 plus 3 plus 2 plus 1 is going to give us 15. So what if I do here in the do while what I did with my while and my for loop? What if I make this condition invalid? So what if I say, well, 5 is less than 10, which is not true. 5 is not less than 10. Or actually, 5 is less than 10. Well, 5 is greater than 10. Sorry about that. If I run this, instead of my sum being 0, I see that my sum is 5. Because what happens is the program's going to start up here, create the variable, assign this value to sum. It's going to hit the do, and it's just going to continue. So it's going to do sum plus equals b, b minus minus, and then it checks this to see, do I want to loop again? So we are guaranteed to run this bit of code at least one time with a do while loop, which can be useful in different circumstances. But that's the big difference between the do while and the while. The while checks the condition first, and it might never run because of that, whereas the do while does the action and then checks the condition at the end, so we'll always run at least one time. And that's the basics of loops. So let us know if you have any comments or questions down below. And please remember to like, subscribe, and click the bell notification icon. It helps us out a lot. And we'll see you in the next video.